conversation. So let me start sharing. There's Miguel is joining us. So yeah, let me see where we are today because I'm using the same slide deck as you can see. I'm trying to see um, how much or how many slides I can uh, put in there before I just think it's too much. And you see there's a new cover each time. Oh, this is not the one. What's going on here? Well, let me go just like this then. I'm kind of spoiling here the content. So here we are. Yes, today is March the 12th. So now I'm telling you again, welcome to today's conversation. I already said we are going to go over like quickly uh, over the topics from yesterday, over yesterday's topics. But in the end, since you have a link, you can just go back there if you want to have more detailed information. Um, uh, because today we need, again, I thought it would be necessary to go over them, but we also have more information. And it is very important for us at Sevam to keep the sequencing going on because as it happens, in constructivism and communicative language teaching approach, the idea is to build new things on the basis provided by the previous knowledge each person has. Um, so let me go over the agenda for today because yesterday in the video we finished part two. So today we're discussing part three. Probably, if time is enough, we will reach point four, teaching integrated language skills. And remember, this track through is there just as a reminder of how or the topics we have already covered, we have already discussed. And also remember that this is like a double-edged sword, you see, because yesterday was one of those situations where planning according to what's happening in real time becomes an issue. Because yesterday I had a couple of problems here with logistics, and this is why I recorded the video so late. But again, the idea of not having the video recorded in advance, like 1 week or so, is because, again, I'm trying to update things according to your progress. And this is not to show off, but that's basically trying to use the same principles I'm telling you to use in your teaching during the course. So that's a little bit of being coherent for me. So yes, today I will touch on learning styles and multiple intelligences, in particular, to determine where we stand today on these two topics that are probably something you have heard in the past. And then we will go over emotional intelligence and social emotional learning that are even more famous, let's say, or even more discussed nowadays. We even have a person at Sevam who received a specific training on social emotional learning. I'm talking about Andres. So, and this is a recommendation I gave you in yesterday's video. If you want to get more information or more detailed information regarding this approach or this important aspect, this is not an approach, this is an important aspect of teaching nowadays, not only in TESOL. You can just talk to him because he's kind of our resident expert. And then we will move on to meeting the needs of diverse learners and teaching integrated language skills. As I said, if time is enough, we will reach point four. So, as I said, considering the situation, I decided to include a little bit of a discussion, it says there, on what we covered in the recording. This is part one because we have two slides for it. And so first, I will ask you, uh, to reflect on these terms because they have a very short definition, but I would like to know what you think of them or what they make you think of, if you are familiar with them, and so on. So the first one is cognitive demand. It says there, again, concisely, cognitive demand is what makes an activity challenging. Do you know anything about this? Do you have an idea? You can just type it in the chat if you want. And then if you decide to type a word as a phrase in the chat, I can just move on to show you something else, which is Bloom's taxonomy. Same situation. Um, you can make a pause, reflect, go back to high school, go back to college, and remember a little of Bloom's taxonomy, which is connected to levels of thinking and task design in this particular case. Same for the I plus one. And this is something we briefly discussed 2 days ago, talking about balancing challenge. Now that we're talking about cognitive demand, that's a synonym of challenge and support at the same time. We discussed yesterday self-efficacy. There you have a short definition. You have UDL principles. Maybe in this case, don't consider principles if you're not familiar with the term, but I can tell you that UDL stands for Universal Design for Learners. Uh, then we have active learning, lifelong learning, and motivation. So as I was saying, I will give you a moment, I will give you a minute, maybe 2 minutes to read the terms, reflect on them, and then you can share. You can just open your microphone and share what you think of them. What if you know any of them, you can discuss them a little bit, or you can just type an idea that comes to your mind when you read them in the chat. So I'm going to mute myself for a moment to give you a moment. Okay, thank you, Pierina, for your comments in the chat. I wonder if anyone else wants to share an idea. As I said, you can just open your microphone and share what you think. There's no wrong answer in this case. You can tell us what you think. You might hit the bell in this case. So Maria Alejandra, Osmel, anybody?
Yes, just give me time because I'm eating. Sorry.
Okay,
I'm
so while Maria Alejandra finishes, I'm guessing her arepa or empanada.
Thank
Um,
you. But I'm going
let's
to write.
okay, a sandwich maybe. Um, okay, we have a new message in the chat. We have Maria. Well, we have three Marias, of course. Two of them are here today. Bloom's taxonomy is the basis of many teaching models because it establishes a clear path to how lessons can be structured for students better understand. So yeah, the comments we have in the chat are correct, are very, very, let's say, context appropriate or Osmel, yes.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, I want to talk about my experience as a when I was a Seventh student. And well, basically, I would like to go over some of them that I already read and that I think it was the way, or let's say, yeah, my experience in the cognitive demand, for example. I remember book five, Intermediate Integrated. When I was taking that book, I it was probably the most challenging for me because I remember that teacher sent us many activities that basically forced me to scaffold my English. I considered at that moment I was on a step or basically on a stair that I needed to level up, and these activities were basically interviews, role playing. I had to look for some information related to countries, cultural aspects, and well, those things that made me think a little bit more than I was used to. In Bloom's taxonomy, I remember the first time I saw this concept, or yeah, the pyramid, was with Mr. Miguel. He was the one who showed us this, and at that point, I realized that it was just in one of these levels, and that I needed to improve my English skills. And well, that took me to the next level in terms of critical thinking, when I needed to express my own thought and not only repeating all previous information that was, let's say, memorized by my brain, but I needed also to say things from my own opinions and to create more well-structured sentences. In the case of active learning, I think that Sevan manages to do this in all the classrooms because we are constantly asking our students to to be more interactive, active, to be participating in all the activities that we send them, especially when we have kind of debates, discussions, or maybe just something simple as how was your weekend or what did you do yesterday. But at that point, we want them to express their own feelings in a free way. Well, with lifelong learning, this was especially something that I understood with Mr. Eduardo and also with Mr. Hugo, because I remember that those were the teachers who always told me to create habits in my daily routines. Let's talk about English routine. It's not just at Savannahs. We already know we are living well in a country where Spanish is spoken, and we need to look for other ways to keep in touch with English. And I remember that Mr. Eduardo made a lot of emphasis on, well, you guys, you need to, every time you go out from here, look for, I don't know, series, movies, listening to English music, or make new friends who speak English and try to keep brief chats with them. And that's what I did. I think that I developed a habit in my English. And finally, motivation for me is the hardest part because I got a group on Saturdays afternoon, and I always say to them, hey, well, if you are just relying on your motivation, uh, better look for discipline. And I always compare this to exercising. You know, when you have to work out, it's a matter of discipline more than the motivation, but how we can create a nice environment in the classroom where they can feel confident also to express freely. But for me, motivation, well, I would say, yeah, discipline. It's the only aspect that push you to get all these goals and achievements. I don't know if you got my point.
Yeah, absolutely. I get what you are saying, Osmer. Thank you for these very useful comments because then we can let Maria Alejandra have breakfast with no interruptions. And this is opening the door for me to talk about these. And basically, in this case, go backwards, which is important for today, going backwards. But in this case, I'll go the other way around because Osmel already mentioned examples of how these things work in an actual classroom, and then I can just tell you a little bit about each one of them. Because when we are talking about cognitive demand, probably the I'm sorry, the intermediate integrated course is a great example of how we intentionally do this at Sevam. And probably, honestly, this is one of the things that sets Sevam apart, okay, from other institutions because we really take seriously this specific aspect of teaching and learning. So cognitive demand refers, yes, to the level of challenge an activity, an exercise, a task poses to the student. And why are we including Bloom's taxonomy to discuss cognitive demand? Because as you guys mentioned in the chat and Osmel implied in his uh, contribution, Bloom's taxonomy explains how we can classify different kinds of thinking depending on its complexity. Um, so we go from bottom up, saying that remembering is of course a useful kind of thinking. Obviously, it's useful, but at the same time, it is not as demanding. So when you are in a classroom and you are just uh, a matching exercise for students, for instance, you are asking them just to remember information and show they remembered information. But then at the top of the pyramid, of this six-level pyramid that has understanding, analyzing, and so on, we have create. And I think we can all agree that I remember in the video I uploaded, I mentioned that in soccer, there is a very common saying that creating is more difficult than destroying. You know, talking about when soccer teams uh, create football like it was Barcelona with Messi some years ago, and it was easier to try and destroy the way they played than building something superior. So yeah, creation, and keep in mind, and this is something I remember we discussed in a course in a workshop actually, or in a talk with the other teachers at Sevam when we make the separation between uh, um, critical thinking and creative thinking. They are, and they can be very closely connected, but that doesn't mean they are the same. Miguel wants to say something about this. So Miguel, please. We cannot hear you, Miguel. Okay, now you're muted, Miguel. Can you try again? I think Miguel is having a problem with his microphone, so let me move on a little bit until he gets to fix it. I was talking about this. Probably Miguel is going to say something about this thing related to the kinds of thinking we're promoting at Sevam. And when he comes back, I can tell you about the I plus one because this is something, as I said a few minutes ago, that we have already discussed in previous sessions. The I plus one was the way Stephen Krashen in the 80s represented what students know about the language and what they are facing in terms of cognitive demand. There's a comment, I'm guessing it's from Miguel. Oh, I don't see anybody waiting in the waiting room, Miguel. I accepted Xiaomi something something Realme, but that's the last person. Yeah, there's nobody waiting. So I was saying that the in this representation, the I plus one, the I stands for the knowledge the student already has, and that plus one represents the level of cognitive demand, or more specifically, how challenging the new information or attaining the new information should be for the student. And if you want to see this in a very simple way, it is like putting a level two student in a book eight or in a level eight class. So you see, that's more challenging. Of course, this is beyond what the student know, which is technically good because you said, okay, I'm challenging the student to learn something new, but it can backfire, of course, because it will be too much, and as a consequence, the student probably would feel overwhelmed and so on. So the I plus one again basically indicates we should place the student in a task or in a situation where he's challenged enough. Okay, and also keeping in mind the word support here stands for the necessity of, yes, he's being challenged, he is expected to reach a certain level, but probably to get there, the student needs support, needs the famous scaffolding, these little specific temporary supports so they can move on progress in their learning. So that's the I plus one. Thank you, Stephen Krashen. Then talking about self-efficacy, it says here, this is how confidence shapes engagement and persistence. This is basically self-efficacy is the idea a student has of being able to improve, to learn, to achieve their goals. Okay, so that's pretty much it in very simple words. Self-efficacy stands for that idea a student has of being capable of accomplishing things. So a high self-efficacy means the student has confidence and believes he can or she can, while a low self-efficacy would be the opposite, of course. The student who doesn't really feel they can do things as expected. So maybe you can connect this with personality, with personal trauma, with uh, specific anxiety due to specific reasons. Yes, of course, but this would be the term for that specific thing, okay, in our field. Then we have universal design for learners, which is a very popular thing in the US, for example, and in many other countries in Europe. This is the idea of teaching being designed universally, not, and this is kind of tricky because it may sound like lessons should be designed like with the famous one size fits all. Like, this is my idea for the lesson, you just do what I say. And this is actually quite the opposite. This is the idea of having a lesson designed to make students feel it is adapted to them. Okay. This is why this is summarized the principles because there are three principles uh, in simple words connected to diversity of means for interactions, for input, and even the kind of texts. So yes, Maria Alejandra.
For example, something that happened to my students, I think it's the Saturday class. I don't remember. Yeah, they are adolescents. When I start to talk with them, and for examples, I give them examples like for habits or their life, they start to get more interested in English. They love, like, for example, I gave gave them last week example like, okay, about something I don't remember, about a concert or something like that, and they loved that, and they were more interested by that. And I was like, why are you so interested in English when we're talking about your regular life? But for example, when they are going to grammar or something like that, they're like, oh, teacher. I don't know. It's like, okay, but I think like both are important. And for example, the things that Osman said, I was a student at the 7-2. And for example, all the teachers that they were my teachers, they did the same things with me. And for example, that was really cool because that gave me a setting to develop and be more confident with my English. So that is something.
Thank you, Maria Alejandra, and that's true. And this is something that is uh, an ongoing discussion for us, right? How we can connect things to our students' interest, feelings, routines, and well, yes, interest in general, because that's what makes it meaningful, basically. And remember, when things are meaningless, we go the other way around. We just don't care. And this is, I'm guessing you are talking either about children or teenagers, and that makes in those cases that's even worse. And nowadays that we have so many special students in the sense of uh, I'm saying special to me, but for others it's just everyday life. But I mean special in the sense of they get so interested in certain topics. They have like very busy lives also at Sevam. These teenagers, because they have singing classes, singing lessons, they have English, they have tennis, they have many things going on. So maybe they are even overwhelmed already by life. And this is when finding their actual interest becomes a door to access their motivation or their engagement, let's say. So, as I was saying, UDL basically stands for offering multiple ways to access information and to show you understood. Uh, so, this is variety for input and for output and for activities, basically. It was included in yesterday's video as a way to show how this you are saying how mm, shaping the lesson to our students' particular personalities, interests, and so on is actually very important and very useful. Then I said yesterday that active learning is basically the consequence of using the previous correctly. Active learning happens when lessons are tailored to our students, for our students, when they are the protagonist of their learning, as we have said in multiple times in the previous sessions, when they feel basically they can accomplish things, and when it is challenging exactly in the same way as it should be, as needed for the case. Um, I always say, I always talk about things I have had to review in my teaching. And one of the things I remember when I was teaching in high school, I enjoyed being the tough teacher, and I really thought it was a benefit for my students. Um, but then you get to wonder this kind of thing. Was it too difficult for them? So if 70% of the class fails the test, does it mean the test was too difficult or that they were unprepared? Or is there another reason, but and this is why this is a spoiler, but by the end of the course next week we will discuss reflective teaching, and that's my favorite thing now in teacher training because it's something I started to implement before I knew that was a thing. But then after completing my degree, UMD is something that I understand is actually useful, like it works in real life. So yeah. Then talking about lifelong learning, I think Osmel gave us a really good example of how this is basically the same I said before, how all of these things becoming habits or becoming an integral part of our lives as learners and as people, uh, you can develop a mindset that helps you continue improving beyond the classroom, continue progressing. And I mean, I'm still learning English, and I always tell my students, especially those I see struggling or kind of frustrated because they fail, for example, the course because they don't pass, or because they are struggling during the course. And I tell them I still make mistakes. And one of the things of recording yesterday's session was that reminder of how you feel when you are recording yourself speaking in another language, a language that is not your first language. Um, it's kind of awkward then listening to yourself because you listen and you hear your mistakes and oh, I should have said this and blah 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 blah. If it happens to me, I can completely understand it happens to you. What I mean, my students or yourselves, or you guys. But the thing is, I always tell them, yes, I always make mistakes. I keep making mistakes, and I'm still learning. And I remember I started learning English, of course, by my own, like in 20, no, in 2000 actually, when I was starting high school. That means 26 years. So Miguel probably, for example, has more years. And I even talk about Eduardo, like Eduardo still learns things, even when we all admire Eduardo's English and whatever you want. But that's a way to tell students, yeah, this is a lifelong process. And there are many other things like this in life. Osmel gave a good example, which is an example I also use uh, when talking about motivation. This is like going to the gym. I mean, if you are carrying some extra weight or haven't worked out in 10 years, you shouldn't expect to get in shape in 1 month. This is like quitting the month after 2 months because you are not as fit as you would like to. And I think that's a great analogy. And finally, talking about motivation, what I said yesterday, connected to SDT, I think that's, if I remember correctly, self-determination theory. So I divided the term into two parts, of course, extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. I think there's no need to talk a lot about that because you can get it from the name. Intrinsic means it comes from within your goals and desires, and extrinsic is what you get from the outside. What I did develop a little more, talking about SDT, was the three pillars of motivation from the perspective of these two researchers who became super famous in the early 2000, in the late 90s, I think, which are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. I think the terms are perfectly understandable. How to make an activity or how to make tasks more uh, motivating and more engaging for students, as long as we promote in them autonomy, competence, and relatedness, which is giving context or adapting it to their context. They should be more motivated, and this is what Maria Alejandra was describing, becomes driving, as it says there, driving learners' participation to make them try, to make them keep going. Um, that's part of motivation. And of course, all of these ideas are connected, but in the end, they were part of yesterday's discussion. So we have another one. I will ask you here to do the same. That is to make a pause, to reflect on them, to see which ones you know, which ones you don't. If you don't know them, like technically, well, probably you can do what you did before, just now, and try to come up with a description, an example. Of course, probably in most cases, the best way to explain something is by providing an example. So we have learning styles, we have multiple intelligences, we have what research says about these two previous points. We have emotional intelligence, social emotional learning, healthy boundaries, and where we stand today. Again, as a hint, for each one of them, you already have a short description about on learning styles and so on. So I'm going to mute myself again for a moment so you can read, digest the information, and well, you can start sharing when you are ready. As I said, you can just raise your hand or open your microphone or share your comment in the chat. All right, thank you so much, Perina, for your comments in the chat. And now I will ask the rest if there's anybody who wants to share something like orally.
Yes, I would like to say something.
Okay, so go ahead, Osmel, and then we can give the floor to Alba.
Well, I would like to start with the emotional intelligence, and especially I consider that we as teachers, we must fulfill this aspect. And I think that a good teacher is emotionally capable or able to direct or this knowledge to the students in a way that, for example, something simple as remembering all the students' names or addressing them in the correct way, or maybe treating them in the best way possible, that create stronger bonds, between teachers and the students. Well, in the case of learning styles, I've heard, but I don't know if this is like true. This is a typical comment on especially high schools and schools about the different learning styles, such as visual or kinesthetic or things like that. But I think that at the end of the day, everyone has all these aspects involved in their learning process. However, we tend to use one of them more than the other ones. So, but that basically define us as individuals who acquire this process, this information. And I remember because I studied, my high school was basically in Cumbres de Venezuela. I don't know if you have heard about that high school. It's a Catholic seminary, basically a boarding school in Manzano Alto. And well, there we were a few students. So the teacher had like enough time to bring us and create tailored activities for each of us. And that was kind of interesting because these teachers, um, they tried to do their best in terms of how they bring this information to us, and depending on what they saw in us as talents at writing or at reading or even at sports, at doing sports. So that was kind of a unique experience I had, let's say, because then I changed high school and I went to a regular high school. So it was completely different. I think that when you have less students, it's easier for you to come up with these ideas, especially with children, because they have some strengths and talents that must be um, we need to take them out of them and to try to let's say explode them in a really funny or interesting way. Well, basically that was what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Osmel. Very good. Very good. Thank you for your contribution. I wonder if Alba wants to share something now.
No, not really. I was just trying to manipulate this cell phone. Nothing
Well,
else.
hello now.
I'm
Hello, hello,
using,
hello then,
I'm
because now we
using it.
hear your
Yeah.
voice. Um,
Yeah.
all right. So when let's me Maria, yes.
Hi. I just wanted to add quickly that in the sense of emotional intelligence, I feel like something that really helps the students feel motivated is to learn how to say that the things that they're learning in the class don't only apply sometimes to English, but also kind of to life in general. Like sometimes when I'm teaching them and they're having a struggle and they just feel like, oh, I just like can't do this, I'm not understanding this. I try to tell them like, hey, it's okay to struggle with things, like not everything in life is going to be easy, and you can use English classes. Like this isn't only for you to learn English, it works for that, of course, that is the purpose, but through that you can also begin to understand that there are going to be other things in the future that you're going to have struggles with, this or that, And now you kind of start learning how to deal with that. Like now you can begin preparing yourself for how when things get harder. And this is like sort of a safe space. We're all learning here. I'm learning also still, like it's okay for you to be struggling in the process, because the idea here is to grow like between you guys together, to ask questions. It's kind of the idea of making the classroom feel a space where they are allowed to fail, because it's like sometimes they are like, I feel like a reason why, mostly with kids, I feel like a reason why they're often so sort of like afraid of learning is because they're afraid of failure, so they just don't try at all. Like I've had a lot of students who are like, I'm just not going to like, I just give up. I'm not gonna pay attention anymore because I'm scared to not learn. And then if I not learn, I fail. And if I fail, my mom's gonna yell at me. My mom's gonna scold me. My dad's gonna take away my phone, whatever. So that kind of fear-based learning that they're quite used to, because that is what used in schools. That is what most parents use at their homes. That really affects them, and it pushes them to a point where they just don't want to try. So I try to tell them like, it's okay if you fail, nothing is going to happen here. The whole point is that you fail. The whole point is that you try. And the results will be whatever, but I need you guys to focus on the trying process. And that kind of mindset helps them shift their perspective on what learning is supposed to be. And so they feel more comfortable with it. It doesn't feel like a task anymore. It feels more of an activity that allows them to explore that kind of experience of failure, to put it that way. And through that, they end up learning English. So it works kind of like for life and for their goal here in general.
Thank you, Maria. And I think you're making a very valid point. Um, and I agree with you, of course. But just out of fun, just to play the devil's advocate, what happens when this kid is there because his mom or her mom wants to? I'm thinking about a specific student at Sevam. I think he's an active student now. He's like an 11-year-old, and he's just there because his mom said, if you don't continue in the course, you will be punished. No more soccer, no more video games. And that means he has repeated the same level like 3 or 4 times. And Miguel knows who's the person because I remember the first time I interacted with the kid. I told Miguel because he was kind of impressed because he didn't care about anything. So I was, in that very optimistic. I am not trying to be mean here, but I also want to keep, to stay focused. We're trying to build principles without becoming too optimistic. And Miguel told me the story, and I said, okay. Uh, so this is probably why what you guys were saying, because guys were talking about this, all of you, one way or another, the importance of learning on a case by case basis. But anyways, this is also connected to what we are seeing now on screen. Pierina made really good comments. Maria just made a very good comment also on the matter. And Osmel, his experience again is a great way to look at it because you can tell the difference. And we are already seeing why, for example, Montessori schools are popular because this is an escape some people have when they want their children to stay away from the super boring, completely disencouraging environment they have in a regular school. And yes, I think we all know how the education system seems to be designed to kill the students' curiosity, motivation, and this is very old. We're talking about decades of view on education that's basically preparing younger people to become productive members of society in the future. And this is like, the Ford model, the Ford manufacturing model. If you like Pink Floyd, if you are old enough or weird enough to know Pink Floyd, The Wall is the best example you can explain this, how this is like a production line. You have one after the other. You kill their spirits, but they are ready to become, I don't know, they can work for the government, they can work in a very boring position. Um, So what do we do? Especially because this is the context in which we are teaching as a and this has happened in many other countries as well. And this is probably why, as you guys said, learning styles are very popular because it seemed like a way to say, hey, you know what? Students are not the same. We should take their particularities into account. And yeah, absolutely, that's completely true. You guys said it in the chat. Maria talked on this, talking about more about the emotional aspect. Osmel explained the difference. But what I'm trying to show here is because, well, I imagine you had some knowledge on the matter because of how popular learning styles are, or this hypothesis or theory is. It is very appealing because it allows us to explain these differences, but unfortunately, there's no specific valid evidence, studies that say that labeling students like this and planning based on this is more effective. Okay, and actually, I already used a word that is a red flag in education, which is labeling. Okay, you can label a student even by saying he's the smartest guy in the class and so on. That's already a label, and we don't know the consequence that label has on the student or on his partners, what influence it has. It can be really negative even as it is positive. Even this is similar to what happens with stereotypes. It can be a positive stereotype, but still you are promoting some kind of discrimination. So they're appealing, but they're not supposed to be a recipe. And the same happens with uh, multiple intelligences. This is something Pierina described very well, I think, if you read her comment, because some people have taken multiple intelligences, like a sacred list we need to consider. So you are this kind of smart, but you're not this kind of smart, and so on. But this is what Howard Gardner, the creator of this model, wanted was not to say this is the way it works in a very strict frame. He wanted the opposite. He wanted to explain what Pierina said in the chat. This is a model that tells us that humans are complex. We have different types of talents, and we might have preferences, but we shouldn't put ourselves, in the little box. This is very normal. As a student at ULA, I remember there were many stereotypes and there were many indirect reference to these multiple intelligence and things. For example, I have heard many engineers who have horrible writing skills saying, no, I'm an engineer. I'm just useless when it comes to writing. You say, "Look, you are a highly educated person, you have knowledge. Why should you just dismiss writing? Because it is not for you." That's kind of one of the problems we have with today's society, that we have made knowledge like a bunch of little separate branches. And this is why maybe architects don't even care about the impact of their designs for the environment or on the environment. And the other way around, we say, oh, you are from the humanities, you are from the liberal arts, so you don't know math. So this is like imposing limitations on ourselves, and this is not what Gardner wanted. Okay, he just was describing our complexity and the fact that we can have inclinations or we can lean towards a side or the other, but in the end, we are all capable. And there are different aspects we can work on, basically. And this is why the definition here or the description says we have strengths, we have talents. Again, this is not a prescription. Like, okay, the best example I can give you, and this is the example I always give. I guess I'm that old now in terms of teaching because I am already at the stage where I use always the same examples with everybody. But this is a very common example I use talking about children. You guys were talking about children. They are usually considered the best example of the use of body motion in teaching. And you say, oh, this is nice. And they are able to move because if you make them sing a song, you can easily make them be willing to sing the song. Well, so you see, you have a mix. It's not only that they are children, they have better plasticity in their brain. That's a factor, yes, but also you are using immersion, you see, because you are speaking in English when you're singing a song. You are not saying jump es saltar, speak es hablar. hug es abrazar. No, if you're singing the song, for example, or you're using Simon Says as a game, yo está jugando Simon Dice, you are using body motion, kinesthetic intelligence, but you're also using your linguistic intelligence when you tell them hug. Y ellos miran, oh, what's hugging? And you say hug. And say, oh, hug. And then you go and say, oh, jump. What's jump? And you jump. You are not translating. You are just making them be immersed in the language while using their bodies, and you're avoiding translation. And you see, going back to Bloom, you say you are not just going to remember, you are associating, and then they are applying, which is another level beyond remembering and understanding. You are applying the information right away. And then if you add repetition, because we said a couple of days ago that this course is not to tell you that all things are all negative, because you can use repetition, and this is also psychology, the psychology of learning. But if you keep singing the song and you keep adding verbs, you are using something that seems behaviorist or repetitive, as in audiolingualism, and you are giving it a more communicative touch. And this also takes me back to what we said about the post method era. So going back to our topic here, what we can get from learning styles and multiple intelligences is that they are not supposed to be prescriptive. They are supposed to work as reminders. For this, you see that we have to be flexible and use variety more than labeling our students and say, no, he works better with when we're listening to audios and whatever. Yes, he can have this preference or this more developed, but this is just a reminder again of us giving variety in our lessons, providing them with variety, as I said, with universal design of input and output. And then we have emotional intelligence, as you guys also explained very well. This is in a very few words, in very few words, in very simple words. This is the ability, as it says there, to recognize emotions and social dimensions of learning. So in this case, it's basically the ability you have to recognize your emotions, recognize your emotions and manage them appropriately. Okay, not going crazy, not letting frustration take over, and so on. And I think Pierina used a very good expression here when we said all of this, including emotional intelligence, I would say, is keeping in mind that we are human beings and students are also human beings. They are not computers. Something else I mentioned yesterday on the topic was the influence of Noam Chomsky for linguistics and the cognitivist approach to language learning. And he basically said we are computers who are born or fabricated, let's say, are built with an internal universal grammar device. But nowadays, we know that's not true. We are human beings. And as much as we have a brain to process information and produce outputs, this is our brain is shaped by the environment and also by another part of us, which are our emotions. And this is why probably social emotional learning nowadays is one of the main topics in our field, because as it says there, social emotional learning is emotional intelligence in action in schools and classrooms. This is, in other words, how in the field of education we are using social emotional learning to basically encourage mental health, well-being in our students to benefit their learning. Um, but it sounds great. Of course, it sounds great. What I'm adding here with healthy boundaries, Perina mentioned healthy boundaries in general, but here I'm talking about the healthy boundaries. I'm not saying that's not correct. That's a very good idea to have necessary limits, but in this case, the necessary limits are regarding these approaches, okay, social emotional learning in particular, because well, I think there's a psychologist in the room, but in general, even though teachers are trained in psychology, uh, I took like 6 classes, for example. We are not psychologists, we are not therapists. So the thing with social emotional learning, I think the biggest downside is that it can be confused with therapy. And as Maria said, it's on us, trying to help the student build, like what we said before in other sessions, confidence, uh, to feel okay with making mistakes, to feel surrounded by people who care about him. And remember, this is also what we said about humanistic psychology, right? Maslow's pyramid, for instance, you need to go to cover certain necessities before thinking of, going to the top, self-realization. Um, but it's part of our role, but this is not our role. And if you go and watch yesterday's video, I said that many of the strategies proposed in social emotional learning are very sensitive and should be used only by people who are trained. Okay. And another thing to keep in mind about social emotional learning, talking about boundaries, like we can get the spirit of social emotional learning and apply it in the way Maria summarized it. But then again, with healthy boundaries and remembering that we are also living in a different culture because, of course, we look up to the research field, to the academy in the United States, where we're living in a different society. So in many cases, these strategies can work in a very different way, and that makes it even more sensitive. So my recommendation would be when you're facing this kind of situation, talk to Miguel. Poor Miguel, I'm always saying going back to him, but again, he's the guy here in charge. Um, Explain the situation. I'm facing this with a student, and you can get from Miguel something that is very, very, very important for us, which is background. What happened to me in the case I just told you about. Maybe I would have gotten like really frustrated. Oh my God, he doesn't want to participate. He's just bored. He's drawing. He's in a different dimension. When I talk to him, I don't notice anything weird. So this is just straightforward motivation. Oh, and then when I spoke to Miguel, I said, okay, there's something going on here that I didn't know. There is also something we can see, for example, in regular schools when the teacher from one grade talks to the other grade, to the one from a different year. And you say, oh, well, this student has this without labeling, avoiding prejudices and discrimination, but you can get background. Like, you know what? This little boy was raised by his great grandma without discipline, so he usually has an issue with this and this and this. That's always useful information. So again, before becoming in-class therapists, especially when you have a more serious situation, go ahead and talk to Miguel. So what I just said is basically where we stand today. Inclusion. If you consider everything I have said, self-efficacy, universal design for learners, motivation, interest, social emotional learning, multiple intelligences, and so on, all of these sum up in real inclusion. This is what inclusion should look like in our classroom, okay? Taking into account each student the best way we can. In this the basic way to do it is to include or to offer them choices, which is super important. I mentioned that in yesterday's video. Offering them choices, even for selecting the topics, multiple ways to engage with information, get, as I said before, a couple of times, input, output, and avoiding labeling, okay? So it's already 9:16, which means we only have 30 minutes left. But as I said before, I imagine this would be necessary, so not an issue. This is the beauty. Yesterday, I had the bad consequences of planning according to progress, but today I'll see the good part, the good consequences of planning according to progress, because we will make some adjustments for tomorrow, depending on how far we get in today's discussion. So why all of this I just showed you matters for today's work, what we will be doing today. As I said, this has to do with this phrase we have here, from understanding to responding. We're talking all day today about understanding our students. After all, in day one and day two, we were focusing on us, trying to build, if you think about it, I'm kind of spoiling because this should be a conclusion you guys reach on your own. But what we're trying to do here with the first module or the first part of the course is building a teaching identity and a teaching philosophy. We already know it is guided by this inclusion, this premise of being inclusive the right way, and knowing what is our approach, which is the CLT's version we have in the post method era, right? Flexibility, adaptation, a variety of inputs and outputs, and so on. That's our role, our philosophy, and this is what we were trying to accomplish in day one and day two. Yesterday and today, we are trying to move from the teacher to the student, which I think we just did very effectively considering the time. And then we're going to see today and tomorrow how we respond, the way we respond to this understanding we're supposed to reach on our students. So there you have the diversity we have explored connects directly to our first session, big ideas. As I said, English is not one thing. We have Englishes. And as much as there isn't one single English, there isn't one single type of a student. If English varies across contexts, cultures, and communities, then our teaching must be flexible enough to honor that diversity. That's inclusion and equity. Understanding how learners think, feel, and engage helps us design activities that meet them where they are and lead them to where they are expected to go. They are different, uh, but also each group is different. So even if I have an activity, a project that worked perfectly with a group, you guys know, I know, Miguel knows, there's no guarantee it will also work with another group. This is also important on flexibility, both in teaching, but also in planning. A plan that is not flexible has more possibilities of failing or of not reaching its goal, okay? So flexibility is a key word here in education in general, and for us at SEBAM, of course, it is as well. Inclusion, as I said, is about offering multiple ways to engage, not assigning fixed types or labels. And as I said, today we shift from understanding, learning diversity to responding to it in a practical, classroom-ready way. So we'll begin with noticing and studying preferences in action because language is diverse, learners are diverse, and teaching must be responsive to that diversity, okay? So identifying studying preferences, which is the other term for learning styles, and I forgot to mention this today, I did yesterday, um, an alternative term for learning styles because we have seen like there's no solid evidence, there's no enough research. So this is more like a hypothesis or a theory than a fact that can be misleading because it's like processing information is different in each brain. So this is a complex topic. And since we don't want to get into this discussion, instead of talking about learning styles, we're talking about studying preferences. Okay, so this is the continuation of part 3, which is responsive and inclusive teaching. If you didn't watch the video, you didn't see the section header, but this is the name of part 3. So how do you spot study preferences? These are suggestions. And as I said, when I give you these lists of suggested activities or practices, keep in mind there are many others. You can come up with your own, but probably you will get the idea, and that's the point of this slide. So for instance, you have observe engagement patterns, notice, pay attention, and this is why teacher engagement is equally important as a student engagement because of course as if you are as a teacher, I don't know, using your cell phone or looking around or you're just sitting in your at your desk when the students are working on an assignment, you're going to miss the best opportunity you have to notice engagement patterns. So pay attention to their what activities spark their energy, if they work better when they're in groups, when they're in pairs, when there are visuals, when it is about storytelling. There are some students I have seen in the past that really, really like storytelling. They just go and start talking. Uh, Maybe this is cultural, and when I say cultural, it doesn't necessarily mean their city. Maybe it is from a town, a person from a specific town, or this is something in the family. Maybe this is a family, one of those families where people really like sharing stories, or maybe quiet reflection. Maybe this is a more reflective student. Also, something that helps is use rotating modalities, presenting the same content through different formats. There you have some examples. And then again, going back to the first point, watch who works better, who gets like this energy spark or whatever, uh, and take notes, of course, take even a mental note. Ask reflective questions. For example, when do you feel most confident in class? Or if this is too straightforward, something like what helps you remember new words or how do you practice? This is encouraging reflection. This is encouraging metacognition, okay? Are examples of simple prompts. These two are examples of simple prompts to obtain very important information. Because yes, you can say some students don't share a good answer or they are just too shy or they don't really want to talk about it, but maybe others do share. And this is like everything in life. The only way to have a guaranteed success of zero is when you don't try. Okay, but if you try, you can run into interesting, useful results. Offer choice in tasks. You see, this is kind of close to rotating modalities. Let learners choose between writing a paragraph, drawing a concept map, or recording a voice note. Their choices may reveal preferences, especially if you do this more than once. You know, if you offer them choices more than once and you start noticing a pattern. Um, then you have to track participation and retention. Talking about keeping notes, as I said, even mental notes, but the more students you have, the more difficult it would be to remember all of these things. But this is why I'm saying informal. You don't have to keep a journal, which that would be great actually, but I know that's not going to happen probably. But you can just take informal notes about things. And remember this kind of what we call a registro anecdótico in Venezuela, it doesn't have to be everything that happens in the class. You just write anecdotes, specific, relevant things that happen in the class. And even when you're talking about taking attendance, it is useful because students, you know how students can get, especially because we are particularly concerned in this case with adult learners, those who miss 5 classes and then appear on the 6th day saying, "Oh, but I was sick." Like, okay, you were sick, but you missed the 5 classes you missed. Um, so keeping notes, having a record is always a good recommendation. But in this particular context, talking about spotting and study preferences, well, you take notes uh, related to what I just said about, okay, there is a pattern. This student usually prefers writing than speaking. When he's working in a group, he usually remains quiet. Is that because of the topics or because of the task itself or because he doesn't really like working in groups? You see, there are many things. And then you can go and ask him. You see, you can combine them. Then you see like there's the reflection log. Esto es algo que intentamos en el SEBAM. Let's see if it happens in the future. Finally, use exit slips or quick surveys. Um, you have seen in the past exit exams or exit tickets. More actually, exit exam. We have an exit exam, but here I'm referring to exit tickets. When you have at the end of the lesson, ask the opportunity to ask learners to rate the activity or to ask for the content. Like write 2 sentences using the present simple, talking about your everyday routine or something like this. And when they do it, yes, the class is over. But this, in this case, is we are talking about surveys because this is to collect useful information for us, especially for our lesson planning, considering that we are trying to identify their study preferences. Also, keeping in mind that this is an alternative term to learning styles. Uh, you see, I'm kind of running because of what I said. We had 30 minutes left. Now we have 20 minutes left. So this is where we are now. From understanding learners to responding to them, we have already had a slide giving us some pointers to identify preferences in our students. Design activities that reflect how language is actually used. That means communicatively, purposefully, and through multiple skills. This is probably the most important part here. That's kind of a spoiler, but that's a good spoiler, which is a contradiction. But let me see. What learners need from us as teachers? Clear goals. This is something to keep in mind for the rest of the course, not just today. Clear goals they can understand and aim for. I cannot tell you how many times I have reflected on an activity or an exam or something and said, maybe the instructions were not clear. And then I go back and I said, they could be better. Uh, and again, this is both for goals and for what they are aiming for. And this is procedures, clear goals, clear instructions. Also, multiple ways to access content. Content, as I have said many times today, the same for the output, multiple ways to participate. And you see these two, number two and number three, they don't have numbers, but according to the order they are appearing on screen, are the foundation part or a big part of the foundation of universal design for learners, offering multiple ways to access information and to share information. Then emotional safety, as Maria said, this is a must. And this is an important part of building a community. And building a community is an essential aspect of having a productive, successful class. So emotional safety to try, fail, and try again. This is, again, talking about what learners need from us. They also need opportunities for success at different levels. They need support for autonomy and learner agency. I told you a couple of days ago, I am divided into two things in my teaching philosophy now. The two things I love to talk about and to share with others is reflective teaching, number one, and number two, how to promote autonomy and learner agency. I even took a course after returning to Venezuela, and then again, we go back to the same points over and over, and the importance of taking their needs into account, taking the context into account, how to match these with our goals, and how to make it clear and meaningful for the students. These are all important points of promoting autonomy and learner agency. Uh, Before we move on to teaching language as communication and not pieces, I wanted to know if there's a question or a comment or anything at all you want to say now. Okay, if there are not any comments, any questions, anything, I can just continue. Um, Excuse me if I'm running again, but um, today, either ways, whatever happens in the rest of the time we have available, this is the key or the essence of something very important. Okay, this is why the title is a little long. We are expected when we are using universal design, when we are using CLT slash post method era approach to teaching, an approach like this to teaching, we're basically thinking about language as communication. Remember, communicative language teaching, communication, meaning making, negotiating meanings, not pieces. And probably you know, or you can imagine where this is going in the following slides. And this is a very nice picture. I think this is uh, not very common. I think this is the first picture you see in a presentation with me because the others were yesterday. So I'm talking about integrated skills teaching. This is the name this receives, okay? When you have this view of language teaching, you're talking about an integrated skills teaching. According to what I have just mentioned, you can imagine that integrated skills teaching and communicative language teaching and universal design for learners are closely connected, okay? Because again, the language is one. It has different components. You have the four skills, right? You have reading, writing, speaking, listening, but they work together, right? They cooperate with one another. So what are the principles here? Probably they will look very familiar because of what I'm saying and what we have been discussing throughout this during the week. So first, language is used in real life through multiple skills at once. At once is the key part here. It is very difficult to have a conversation where one of the two people is not saying anything. Of course, at least this is not a conversation, right? What we're having today is a more specific setting. But this is the same with reading and writing. Usually, uh, I don't know, and it would be like some very specific scenarios, but in general, when you are writing, you are necessarily reading. Maybe not from other sources, but your own. When you are writing, you are expected or you are supposed to read your own text, uh, even if it is to make sure you are accomplishing your goals, if your plan is going through, and so on. Another principle we have here is skills reinforce each other, what I just said. Um, one of the typical recommendations for beginners or for learners in general is listen before you speak. If you don't have a lot of vocabulary or if you don't have any vocabulary at all, a good recommendation for you is to listen. And maybe out of repetition, and this is even connected to what the example of these children playing Simon Says. They don't have the vocabulary, so they are not going to be the first ones saying, jump, hug, clap your hands. No, they are going to listen to the teacher, and then that supports their speaking. And then if they get positive feedback, they can even start making phrases, building sentences, short sentences, of course. Integration builds fluency, confidence, and motivation because it feels natural. And again, this is a dynamic process. This is not as you can sit down and say, okay, today I will practice my speaking like this and only like this. That would put limits on yourself, right? Um, and as we'll see, even if you're only using your listening, for instance, a typical recommendation I think Osman mentioned is to go and watch cultural products produced in the language, in our target language, in this case, English. I always say I learn English by watching over and over and over again American sitcoms, including, I don't know, Two and a Half Men, Fraser, Seinfeld, of course. Um, I learned the dialogues, yes, but then there's a limit to what you can get from it. If you don't do something afterwards with that, you are, as I said, reaching a limit. Uh, and so, do you think there's fluency? Probably not much. I don't remember who was the one saying that in high school had an issue with a teacher because of the use of contractions, but it was kind of my case. When I started college, I had already learned, or I had already been learning English like for 6 years or 5 years. So it wasn't really a challenge, but then again, I had to work especially on my fluency and confidence. Motivation was not an issue. I already liked the language and I already knew I wanted to be an English teacher, but there was work needed in fluency because maybe I thought I was a super awesome, great, the best English speaker ever. But, when you go back, well, the older you get, the more you question these kind of things. Was I that good or I was just too confident? Um, and then confidence, of course, because I wasn't used to speaking with people in English. So yeah. And the other principle is the activities should reflect real work tasks, not just isolated drills. Listening to people speaking is a real world thing, yes, but then what do you do with it in order to develop your language skills, your communicative competence, as we said on Tuesday? Uh, how do you encourage its development? Moving forward, again, talking about teaching language as communication and not pieces, separate pieces. Um, Learners don't use skills in isolation outside the classroom. That's rarely happen. Again, it happens, but in very specific contexts. But the normal thing is for us trying to avoid the typical, bueno, es que yo para escuchar soy buenísimo, no, yo bueno para hablar soy una máquina, pero, uy, no me pidas escribir nada porque, ajá, no puedo hilar 10 oraciones y convertirlas en un párrafo porque, this is not our goal. Our goal at CEVAM is developing communicative competence to help students learn their communicative competences. Okay, this is our goal. And this means integrated skills because communicative competence means learning about grammar, learning about how to use the language strategically, how to, many things. There's a message here. Oh, I like. Thank you very much. Um, so why teach them that way? If the language is not divided into pieces, why should we teach it divided into pieces, right? Then you can get to analyze the materials, the teaching materials. We have the resources, the slides, enough to class, or the textbook in I don't know, awesome. I don't remember what is the book that children are using now. But anyways, the thing is, that's good. Maybe you can say, I don't like this about off to class, or I don't like this about passages. I don't like this about awesome. That's good. That's part of your role as a teacher. Okay, but what I would say in that case is, what do you suggest? Okay, because and this is something I said in a workshop with the more experienced guys at Seba. I'm talking about, Miguel. Well, Miguel is the coordinator, but I'm talking about Audrey, Eduardo, and so on. Okay. If you don't like it, what do you do? Okay. And this is a super, super important part, in my opinion, in our teaching practices. This is adaptation, content adaptation. Okay. So you see, the skills here seem to be too separated or too isolated from each other. What do you do about it, right? So integrated tasks promote fluency, as I said, coherence, confidence. They allow for more authentic assessment, okay? Because again, we go back to the multimodality issue. If you have the output thing, I mean, you have an exam and the exam is all about grammar and the student gets 100 points. Does that mean the student speaks in English or probably not, right? Authentic assessment then would be something more focused on integrated skills. Keep it in mind again, I'm sorry to be so repetitive, but grammar is important. It's a part of the procedure or the process. But let's listen to Miguel. Yes, Miguel?
Oh yeah, but no, I want you to finish the but, and then I will speak. Don't worry.
Okay,
Just
very
finish
quickly.
the
Aquí
idea.
there's,
So
there you have it. Integrated skills then is a mindset, not a method. Be careful. It is about designing tasks that reflect how language actually lives in the real world. Yes, Miguel.
thank you. About what you were saying about assessment. I don't know if you have already included the differences between summative and okay, but we'll talk further about this. But it's important knowing that evaluation it's something that we take seriously, but it's not like the main issue for us. Why do we take assessment? Because in assessment is like raising a child. You go along with him, you help the student, you help students improve. Well, I was a grumpy father to Osmel, I guess, because I remember I used to tell him like, okay, but don't go away from the subject, don't go away from the topic. But that's guidance. So sometimes we need to see it. Well, differences aside, that we're gonna go along in a process where students are supposed to be taken care of and cared of. So you should care about the process your students are going through. And I think the only way to see it that way in a respectful way, and of course, keeping any personal biases away, is through understanding how assessment works. Because you're going to be partial, you're going to be objective, and you're going to let your students know what they have to improve. That's the to me, that's a construction of a concept of assessment. So it's not saying you're not ready to go. It's saying you need to do this in order to go, which is a whole different scenario. When you tell people what to do in order to achieve the goal of learning the language, instead of saying you're not ready to learn the language, that's limiting. Assessment allows you to go in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Actually, well, I completely agree with Miguel. And now this makes me think of something I said yesterday, the video I've been referring to. But I think you can, yeah, like you can now just skip it. No, I'm kidding. You should go and watch it because you see, it was impossible to say everything again. That was even pointless. But one of the important things Miguel is mentioning here is the impact of providing students with specific feedback. Okay, this is not just about, well, we say build confidence. Praising is a big part of building confidence, but this is not like, oh, good job. And this is what Miguel is saying. This is not when you say positive things, try to be much more specific. You can even find yourself in a situation where the student is improving something he has been struggling with, and that deserves recognition. And probably the student will feel very good if you give it the recognition it deserves. And it also works the other way around. When this is something that needs to be, that needs to more work, and you say, okay, you're not ready to go. And then instead of saying, it's necessary to do this, try this, and blah, 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 blah. Providing good feedback is extremely necessary, is essential. Okay. Both informative assessment and summative assessment, but as Miguel said, we will talk about this in the future, in the near future, actually. Um, I think we can stop here because of time. It's already 10:44, and we will dive into deeper things here. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And as I always say, I'm going to ask you for comments, questions, whatever.